All right, everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Masterclass. My name is Jason Levine, and we're going to be focusing on how to use Reverb today. And in the true spirit of Masterclass, really going into all the details about the various types of Reverb, good practices, when, where to use them, why there are many different types. And then go through, I have like 5 discrete examples that we can kind of mess around with. Hopefully we get to all of them today. It's hard to do in 50 minutes. Believe it or not, reverb is a very deep topic. And then I'm going to talk specifically about just a lot of the parameters and the things that we have in some of our various reverbs in Premiere Pro and Audition, just so that you can be aware of them. Reverb is, certainly for music, for recordings, it's essential. It's pretty much in or on everything that you hear. It's also very useful and commonly used all the time in film, in commercials, virtually everywhere. But it's also one of those things, not unlike a lot of things in audio mixing, that, if you use too much, if you overdo it, or you simply just don't understand what certain parameters do, it can really get out of hand quickly. It can really muddy up a mix, make things very smeared and unintelligible, and that's what you want to avoid. And part of the way that you avoid that is by using different types of reverbs for specific things. But the other part of that is also just understanding what all the various parameters do so that you can really carve out a space and ultimately recreate a particular environment, right, where you're placing a voice or a sound effect or whatever it is, right? You're trying to basically recreate environments that sound natural, that can exist with all these other sounds. So as always, we're coming to you live on Adobe Live, Behance, YouTube, and Twitter Periscope. So thank you so much for joining. Great to see you, JD, Robzilla, What Is Up, Cal, Noor, Steve, Festus, Kosoboom. I saw that you need some adult supervision. Very cool. Wade, how's it going? Niraj, 22 Design Studio, nice to see you. Thanks so much for joining. And over on Twitter Periscope, we've got Valentina V, we've got Melissa A, we've got Desiree. Great to see all of you. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to dive right in. And before I even do anything, let's get nerdy. It's my good friend Stephanie Ruiz had this great t-shirt years ago, and it said, "Talk nerdy to me." Who knows who wrote the song that's making fun of. Okay. Say it in the chat. All right. So, reverb. 5 essential types. 5 main types of reverb. These are the 5. Good thing to do and to understand what they are before you apply them to anything, right? Some are kind of universal. Some should definitely not be used for dialogue. Some are better for certain types of instruments. Ultimately, you can use anything for anything. It's really your own personal choice. But understanding where they shine and where they're best will also help you get a better and cleaner mix. So first of all, hall reverbs. Now this is probably my go-to for most things. Halls are just that. They simulate a concert hall type ambience. Very warm, lots of depth, right? Think of a concert hall, right? Big space, long decays, very rich. The sound lingers, it fills the room. It gives you that, that's why classical concerts and beautifully crafted concert halls sound so freaking good. It's not just that the musicians are great, whether it's the LSO or the New York Philharmonic or whatever. It's the room. And you'll hear this if you talk to, concert goers and things like that, especially those who go to like the Philharmonic and Lincoln Center and stuff like that. They'll tell you part of it is the design of the hall that they're in. An actual hall, that is what hall reverb simulates. It's great for classical instrumentation. It's wonderful for lead vocals. It can, however, get very muddy. It can make things very, very muddy because it is so warm. It is so big. The decays, the tails of the reverb are so long. So you need to use it appropriately. I don't say sparingly because typically you use a lot of hall, but you got to be aware that it can make things dark and it can make things kind of a little muffled sounding if you kind of overdo it and if you use it across too many things. Okay, chamber reverbs. Now this is one of my other favorites, largely because I built a chamber in this house here, in this studio, as well as one that I used years ago, and you're going to get to hear an example of a live chamber recording. So chambers are specifically built spaces for creating reverberant and or echoey environments. Okay, very famously, Abbey Road Studios, Abbey Road Studio number 2, in fact, had some very classic chambers that they used on pretty much all Beatle recordings, Pink Floyd, the Kinks, all these kinds of things. Also warm, and the difference between a hall and a chamber is that the chamber is, you actually are, the way that a chamber reverb works is, there's actually a loudspeaker that is basically sent a feed from the mix desk, or in this case, from your NLE. You're blasting it into a space, and then you have microphones in that space, typically up high, that are capturing the reflection off of the walls, right? And depending upon how you place the microphones, where you place the speaker, the distance involved, you can create different sounds. You can adjust. You're physically creating how long some of those decays can last. You're also adjusting based on position of the speaker, where it's bouncing the sound off of, how bright it's going to sound, how warm it's going to sound. Chambers are not a thing so much anymore. Abbey Road still has theirs. In fact, they tried to recreate the original chamber echo when they did a lot of the Beatles remixes. You know I'm a fan. It's not quite the same. It just isn't. But they're wonderful. They're wonderful on drums. They're wonderful on backgrounds. Chambers in particular, if you want to get kind of like that John Bonham drumming sound. Now, again, part of that is his drums. Part of it is how they're tuned, how the kick drum is kind of loose. But if you want that kind of that really big drum sound, chambers are great. Chambers also can mimic, sometimes they're tiled, sometimes they're stone. These can give different types of ambient type sounds, reverberant sounds that are just really wonderful for like tight percussive instrumentation. All right. And then there's room reverb. Now, this is my go-to for dialogue, for just kind of recreating ambience. You've heard me talk about this a lot on stream when we've done mixing sound to picture. Room is just that. You are effectively trying to recapture the sonic qualities of a particular space. So rooms can be anything. They can be any size. They can be any color. The tonality, as I wrote here, it varies from neutral to bright to reflective, right? A classroom. What are classrooms? Well, they're usually rectangular, whether it's deep or wide. So they typically have some echo characteristics. They're kind of reflective. They're usually pretty bright, although they tend to have kind of a weird sort of muddy mid-range. Again, these are great. They can kind of work on anything. You just need to fine-tune them based on what it is that you're putting in the room or what kind of space you're trying to recreate. Plate reverb. So this is something that came out of the 60s and 70s. Again, there are some very famous plates, courtesy of Abbey Road, used on a gazillion records. Plates are just that. It's a man-made, huge metal plate that basically had, think of it like a speaker coil, feeding this plate that would create vibrations and cause the plate to literally wiggle. And then they would have electronics to amplify the sound that produced, creating this very shimmery, sometimes warm, but oftentimes kind of bright, but just bright and shimmery, glorious kind of sound. These plates were huge, so they also could have really long decays. So you hear a lot of plate reverb on very, very good lead vocals. There's a track by George Michael from years ago called Jesus to a Child, and I remember when that song came out. It was a huge hit song, but I remember the first thing that struck me was the vocal sound, because every sound that he makes, and he was an amazing vocalist anyway, but in particular, all the consonant sounds and the S's and the T's, they all just like, you felt this kind of shimmer. Now, sometimes you don't want that, but this was a slow ballad. The music was very much behind the vocal, and it just transports you to a different place. So if you want very lush, shimmery, not too dark, again, usually leans more towards the mid-rangey, bright side, kind of a reverb for your vocal, plate reverbs. They're wonderful. And the last one, which is not so common in terms of mixing for NLEs, but any guitarist will be very familiar with these, which are spring reverbs. So again, this is the guitar verb. If you ever see any classic 60s Fender guitar amps, they typically have spring reverb in them. You know, if you bang the amp, you'll hear that kind of thing, because there's literally this wound coil in there. Not always wound, sometimes it's straight, and it's very similar to the plate. It's electrified and then amplified, right? So you get this very bright, kind of twangy sound. It is just wonderful for electric guitar. And the other thing is, because it really doesn't have it has nothing similar to a hall or a chamber, it really sticks out. So if you apply spring reverb to a guitar, either after the fact with like a plug-in or while recording, that guitar is just going to leap out of the mix, because it just has this particular decay, this particular kind of ambient sound to it that is unlike anything else that you've captured. So spring can be used for anything, theoretically, but it's really good on guitar, on sort of bright, stringed type instruments. I wouldn't use a spring on something like a violin, because violins are already bright and high-pitched, and that bright twanginess is just going to make it sound harsh. Also, vocals, probably not my first choice, although a lot of cheap reverb units that were actually, you could buy spring reverb, I say boxes, they were massive, for vocals. A lot of your cheap PA systems, anybody who did like PA, who worked PAs like in the 80s and 90s, this guy right here, typically had built-in, like PV mixers used to have built-in spring reverbs. And give me a little verb, and it was so bad. It was so bad, but you know, it was better than nothing. Anyway, those are the 5 main types. That's what you need to be aware of, and very cool. Okay, we got that. What is up, Leandro, Garrick, the Edit Doctor, Unbox Muse, Corpus, Melissa A 2020, how are you? Muba, Mink, Adam Barker, great to see you. Maria Yolanda Garcia Olave, nice to see you as well. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? Now that you know the types, let's start hearing and playing with some of these. Okay, so I have pulled up, as mentioned, about 5 different sessions here. So we've got one of my tracks, Toot Toot Monster, a song called Fabulous that I recorded, almost 20 years ago. It's got spring reverb on it, though. That's why I wanted to pull that one up, as well as chamber reverb. Actual chamber, not a plug-in. Let you hear that. We're going to hear a little bit from Fear the Q-Tip. We're going to go to the Jason and Pennywise short film that we've been working on. There's a lot of strings in there. Again, another good opportunity to use hall and or chamber. And then a little bit of sound design, just to once again kind of emphasize how this can be used for sound effects as well. Reverb is not just for voices and instruments. It's always used in sound design, so hopefully we'll get to that. And then I have another scene from that short film, which is just some dialogue talking about how to use room reverb. Okay. So let's start, what should we start with? Hall? Okay, yeah, let's start with some hall. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to change my mind. We're going to start with lead vocal, or just voices, and kind of the concept of using something as simple as like hall or room, okay? So this is the raw, unmastered session for Fear the Q-Tip. This was from the recent remix of it, although this was not necessarily the final remix track, so this is going to sound a little different to the release version. I can't play the whole thing necessarily, but I'll get to hear the soloed vocal here. But let's just go into this, and you're going to hear, let me see if what's on here already. So I've got 2 lead vocals on this, a scratch, which wound up becoming the lead vocal, and then I just doubled it. Okay, so it's 2 lead vocals, and currently these are both dry. So let's just kind of listen to what this sounds like right away, all right? Najiha, Najla, nerdy, just what I need. Oh, you're so welcome. Awesome. Fear the Q-Tip, Wade. Okay. Here we go. Oh, you know what? I need headphones so I can hear what you're hearing. Okay.
Fear the Q-Tip, don't push it too far into your ear. Little white cotton swab, pillow soft but never harm. Place it gently, twirl it round. ASMR scratchy sound. Move it to the other side. Brace yourself, close your eyes. Haven't cleaned them for a while. More I twirl, the less I smile.
Jean-Pierre Pinochet. This question has nothing to do with the class, but is Premiere running slow after the last update? Jean-Pierre, I'm not going to lie to you. I have had a few people report that, myself included. However, and that's actually running on my Mac system. On my Windows system, it is flying like nobody's business. So I'm going to look into that. I just had 2 people report that to me yesterday. I wouldn't say it's significant slowdown, but things seem to be a little slower, and I don't know what's causing it. I don't know if you're on Mac OS. I'm going to look into it. So if you want to hit me up on Twitter, I'll revisit that later today. All right. Okay, so here we have our lead vocals. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you just inserting a reverb. Now, I don't typically recommend inserting a reverb. We're not going to go into the whole concept of signal flow. We've done that before. You can also revisit some of the past masterclasses. But there's essentially 2 ways in both Audition and Premiere to use reverb. You can insert reverb on an effects insert, right, which is this first section here inside the mixer. Now, typically, effects that you insert, which means that you send the signal to that effect, it gets processed, and then it sends it right back to that track. Compression, EQ. Maybe something like stereo expansion. But ultimately, those are really the only things that you insert. The reason for that is, if you insert reverb, you don't have total control over your original signal, your reverberated signal, and that's something that you usually want. Now, in many cases, and I'm certainly, it's not a matter of being guilty of it, sometimes I do insert reverb at the end of the chain if I don't require any further tweaking, or if I'm not going to be sort of playing around with the wet and dry balances. So it's totally legit to insert it. Typically, you'll use a send for a reverb, and we'll talk about that as well. You can actually see that I have some sends implemented in here. But let's start with just something very basic. So you'll notice that I have both of the lead vocals actually going to a bus. All right, so I've grouped them, submixed them to go to their own fader together called all vocals. You can see the output of these 2 tracks is going to all vocals. So on this all vocal track, this is where I'm now going to, I'm going to place the reverb. So this is, I'm technically inserting it, but I'm inserting it after they've been grouped and sent together. So slightly different, but you'll see in a moment. This is going to become more clear. So let's go ahead and add our studio reverb. So we're going to go to our effects insert here, come up to reverb, studio reverb. Now, the reason I like this one is, you've seen me shown this a million times, is that it just has all of the kind of basic parameters here. And if you can understand what all these things mean, you can then use any reverb. I mean, they all have different UIs. This is not like beautiful by any stretch. The UI kind of sucks, but because it's just data, right? There's so many awesome reverb plugins that are just beautiful. They don't all sound great. This one sounds great, and it just has a very numeric, nerd-looking UI. But the good news is, if you're really into it and you know what you're doing, the nerd stuff is super important. And this allows you to really dial in a particular sound. Now, one thing to note here is that this studio reverb can mimic all different kinds of sounds. So whereas typically you'll choose, what type of reverb do you want? I want a hall, I want a room, I wanted this, I wanted that. This one allows you to build it based on all these parameters. Now, of course, there are presets, and you'll see things like great hall, guitar amp, which is actually a preset that I created off of an impulse from a spring reverb 100 years ago. Room ambience, again, room. Vocal reverb, these are plates. Drum plates, same thing, trying to emulate plates. So you have presets to kind of get you started. So let's just talk about placing like a lead vocal in something like a great hall. Now, this is a very fast song. So for fast vocals, I don't recommend a hall. Why? Because it's going to be very echoey, right? And big. And remember, I told you, it's going to be real easy to start to kind of crowd that mid-range space with a lot of reverberant warmth. But it sounds pretty good, and it sounds really nice on vocals. So because this is at the end of the signal chain, what I'll typically do in something like this is that I'll put the dry signal all the way up to 100, and then I'm going to gradually increase the wet signal until I kind of like the way that it sounds. So let's take a listen here.
But don't let the waxy gunk fool ya, 'cause some of that residue's cool, yeah. If you push it too far, you'll think that you're seeing stars. You'll be tearing, won't be hearing, 'cause you pushed it too far. Q-tip. Fear the Q-tip.
Okay, let's kill it.
Fear the Q-tip. Don't push it too far into your ear, or you will not be able to hear.
Let's go all the way.
That cotton swab is something to fear. Why must I clean my ears? The thought of it brings me to tears. Must I clean them every day? Maybe not, but don't delay.
All right, 86%, way too freaking much, right? But you can hear what it's doing. And again, you can see that this has a 6,000 millisecond, a 6-second decay. So a lot of that has to do, you're not going to necessarily hear 6 seconds of a reverb tail. A lot of that has to do with how that signal is EQ'd and recorded in the first place. But ultimately, it's a very long tail. And you can hear that it's warm, but you could also hear some of those background vocals came in, which I believe are also in a hall, and they were panned especially, and they're using a send. It got a little muddy having the lead vocal in that hall and then the background vocals in a hall too. All right, let me just shuttle over to that section again, maybe so we can hear that.
Fear
Where is
the waxy gum, yeah. If you push it too far, you'll think that you're seeing stars. You'll be tearing, won't be hearing, cause you pushed it too far.
Okay, now let me take out the lead vocals and just let you hear the backgrounds. All right, so you can hear how lush it sounds on backgrounds. It's perfect, right? And I have very little of the dry signal of the background vocals coming in there. It's mostly the reverberant signal because it just creates this very lush, spacey, it's like filling it in with paint. Okay, now, let's take it out of there and let's listen to what that sounds like dry. All right? Just a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, a little bit more lush, okay? So that's using something like a hall. Now, again, as I mentioned, for very fast lead vocals like this one, hall's not great because what's going to happen is when I bring back the entire track,
Fear the Q-tip. Fear the Q-tip. Fear the Q-tip. Don't push it too far into your ear, or you will not be able to hear.
it just kind of sounds out of place. Now, it may not sound out of place to you. You may go, oh, that sounds fine. It's weird. There shouldn't be that much reverb tail and kind of this fast, punchy, punctuated vocal. So this would be a good opportunity to use something like Room, okay? So again, going into that same studio reverb, this could be a very small room. Now you'll notice you have room size. It goes all the way from 1 to 100. So let's take this down to the smallest room size, okay? Now, for a decay, I want this less than a second, meaning that I don't want this to be big or reflective. I just want to give it a little bit of ambience, right? And as I mentioned, this is sometimes a good way to just make things kind of stick out a little bit. All right. Early reflections. Now, we're gonna look at this in just a few seconds. Early reflections are sometimes known as pre-delay. It's kind of what you hear before you actually hear the signal going through the reverb. There's actually something that happens, some reflections that happen before it really hits you. Probably want to use minimal early reflection. Now, it's nice to have some early reflection because that's going to make that, whatever that is, whether it's a vocal or a snare drum, kind of stand out, all right? If you use too much early reflection, though, literally, you can almost hear things like bouncing. So you want to be careful with early reflection. Width is just that. It's how wide the stereo image is of that particular reverb. If you want it totally mono sounding, you can have your width at 0. More stereo sounding, increase the amount. All right, so high and low frequency cut. So we've talked about this before. So high frequency cut, this is what kind of determines the color and the type of reverb that you're creating. So because we based this off of the Great Hall, you'll see that it's basically slicing off all frequencies above 4,000 hertz, 4K. This is kind of the high, mid-range fundamental of voice. 4,500 I often call the rubber soul EQ. If you listen to the album Rubber Soul by the Beatles, 1965, there's a bump in the overall vocal equalization at around 4,500 hertz that really makes vocals pop through. Below that, though, and if you're cutting off 5K, 6K, 8K, 10K, you're cutting off all the high end, all the shimmer, all the sibilance if there is any. So it's just going to sound warmer and a little bit darker, all right? The opposite of that, low frequency cut. So here, we don't want to reverberate any low frequency in my voice. So what this is telling us is that at 300 hertz, we're not adding reverb to anything below 300. All right, which is a good thing. You don't want to add reverb to my 60 hertz low end. It's just going to make it boomy and dark, and it's going to muddy up the mix. So if you're finding that your reverb is kind of muddying things up, look at where the low frequency cut is. For most things, you want to keep this above around 250. You very rarely want to reverberate below that unless you're doing sound design. Different story. And in a lot of cases, this low frequency cut might be 300-400 or more, all right? Damping and diffusion. Okay, so these two things are also pretty critical. So damping is basically a softening of the high frequencies, all right? So the more that you dampen the reverberated signal, as the decay tails off, it's going to just start to sound a little bit warmer. So damping is kind of like a warm slider. With no damping, it's going to be as bright as all these other characteristics make it out to be. 100% damping, it's going to be less bright. Diffusion is kind of like damping, except that it works more on the basis of those reflections. What happens to those reflections? With no diffusion, so we're not think of it like light diffusers. With no diffusion, it's going to be brighter. You're hearing every piece, every sonic characteristic based on the high and low frequency cut of that reverb. As you add diffusion, as you diffuse it more, you're now softening, all right, and taking the edge off of those brighter reflections, okay? So if you want to keep something like very bright, but you don't want the echoes, the subsequent decay to sound brighter, add more diffusion. If you want the decays to sound brighter, but you want to kind of soften the overall effect, add more dampening. And I usually use a combination of the two. All right, so let's take a listen to this in a small room and hear what this sounds like and kind of create something that just makes my vocals stand out. All right, here we go.
That cotton swab is something to fear. Why must I clean my ears? The thought of it brings me to tears. Must have cleaned them every day. Maybe not, but don't delay.
Okay, so right now we've got the wet signal all the way up. So we're just listening to what the room sounds like. So this kind of sounds like a small little boxy room, right? So we're going to start to play around with some of these parameters to get it to sound like the way I want.
Here's a sticky feeling, Nicky, gently pulling back. It's tricky. What is this? It's kind of listening. Take a look, don't be caught sniffing. No. Is it really necessary? Is it even sanitary? Even for the cleanest fellow goes in white and comes out yellow. But don't let the waxy gun fool ya, 'cause some of that residue's cool, yeah. If you push it too far, you'll think that you're seeing stars. You'll be tearing, won't be hearing, 'cause you pushed it too far. Oh, fear the Q-tip. Fear the Q-tip.
All right. So let's bring the dry signal back now and gradually increase the wet signal to bring some of that room reverb in there.
Q-tip, don't push it too far into your ear, or you will not be able to hear. That cotton swab is something to fear. Fear the Q-tip, don't push it too far into your ear. Fear the Q-tip. Fear the Q-tip, don't push it too far into your ear. Ouch.
I could actually hear myself clapping in there.
The Q-tip, don't push it too far into your ear. A little white cotton swab, pillow soft could never harm. Place it gently, twirl it round. ASMR scratchy sound. Move it to the other side. Brace yourself, close your eyes. Haven't cleaned them for a while. More I twirl, the less I smile. But don't let the waxy gunk fool ya. Cause some of that residue's cool, yeah. If you push it too far, you'll think that you're seeing stars. You'll be cause you pushed it too far.
Okay, so now that we have the vocals in the room and the background vocals in the hall, take a listen to this and hear how they really complement each other now.
Yeah, if you push it too far, you'll think that you're seeing stars. You'll be tearing, won't be hearing, cause you pushed it too far. Oh, fear the Q-tip.
Okay? Now, you might be sitting there going, it all sounds the same to me. And if you're not a complete audio nerd listening on a good system or in headphones, it may very well sound very similar to you. It is not. All right? So these are subtle changes, right? This is nerd level processing, but understanding how this works is going to make your mixes infinitely better. All right? So stick with me. All right, let's check the chats for questions. Wade, I might be hearing your clapping too. Thanks a lot, Wade. Appreciate that. Dana Pride, you are in awe. Don't push it too far. It's good advice. All right. Maria, movement, light, the sound. Yes, indeed. All right. Cal, thought I knew what reverb was, but nope, not hardly. Slightly dismayed, but fascinated by how rich a topic this is. Oh, that's awesome. Steve, you hear a little Frank Zappa in your vocals on this one. Oh, you better believe it. Huge influence. And in fact, which song is that of mine where I say, not a vegetable? Candy's not a vegetable. Where do I say that? There's a reference. I can't remember in my own song. Maybe it's the Toot Toot Monster. I can't remember now. Where I say something about vegetables. I think it is the Toot Toot Monster. And I say, candy's not a vegetable. That's a reference to cabbage is a vegetable, which is from Absolutely Free, 1968. So yes, huge Zappa fan. Excellent reference, Steve. Way to go. Dana, the captions are not understanding Q-tip. Umacorn, you can hear it. Awesome. Okay, that's great to hear. All right. Who have we got here over on Twitter Periscope? Leandro, oh, it's always nice to see you too. How's it going? All right. Emre Muderis, all right. Jelmer, all right. Erlich Asaf, nice to see you. Steve can hear the changes. Awesome. Armando, in some future audition, add folder to organize elements. Armando, this is atop the requests. So yes, I hope this comes sooner than later. You are not the only one to be asking for that. Okay. All right. Wow, we're already almost running out of time. 22 minutes. Okay, so very quickly, we're going to jump ahead. So that was a little bit on room, a little bit on hall. We're going to revisit those again. Let me just show you a very quick example here. Some printed examples. So again, these were printed to the track from a very old track of mine. I didn't write this tune. This is a cover song from 1957 called Fabulous, recorded for an album of mine circa 2000. Yeah. And this has some really fantastic electric guitar played through a classic 60s Fender twin reverb. And it's printed to the track so you can hear it. So let me just let you get a quick example of this. Let me see if I do have got some L2 on there. Okay, so I can't take it off to show you, but when you listen to and I'll separate the guitars so that you can hear, they're panned. Oh, they're not panned. Let me go ahead and pan them so you can kind of get a better discrete listening experience. But this is spring reverb. Here we go. Now, I don't know if you can hear that. You can actually hear like this kind of sound. It's the spring vibrating. So again, now it's an electric guitar going through a 60s amp. It's already got that bright mid-range. I just love the sound of this. But most importantly, you can hear that it's a very bright but pleasant sounding brightness with a fairly long decay, and that's just because we dialed in. I think we cranked it almost all the way up there. So again, bright, very sort of reflective sounding because you're actually hearing the spring, be electrified and vibrate. It's super cool. Just to point out too, now this is not, listening back to this now, it didn't sound as good as I remembered it. I had years ago, we used to have a way that you could, I don't know if you still can. You can still load your own impulses. So we had a different reverb effect in the old version of Cool Edit. We're talking like 1999 or 2001 or something. That allowed you to build your own reverbs based on impulses that you would record. The impulse is the actual moment. This is actually how they create 24-bit reverb. They go into a space. It used to be old school. You used to go in with some digital, like a DAT machine or some kind of digital recorder, stereo microphones, and then you would pop a balloon. And the balloon pop would create this psh, right? And there'd be this, whatever this reverb tail sounds like. That is the impulse. So you'd capture that impulse, you'd feed it into this effect, and it would convert that into a signal that you could then feed sound into and play through it, and it would create these kind of reverberant environments. So I built one around a spring. It may have actually been from this very amp. I can't remember. So it's actually in there. It's not as good. All right, so it's in the studio reverb, and it's called Guitar Amp Verb. There's a mono version and a stereo version. It's okay. Not quite as close. In fact, I think, if I remember correctly, yeah, so one of the things you'll notice is I've got the high frequency cut. We're not cutting anything. It's all the way up at 20,000 hertz. So that means I'm letting all of the high frequency pass through to make it as bright and twangy as possible. And notice I'm cutting everything below 500. Not that there's anything resonating at 500 anyway, but that's kind of a characteristic. You could probably even go a little bit higher, but that'll just eliminate all boominess, all muddiness, all bassiness to kind of replicate that spring, okay? So again, the high frequency, low frequency cuts, very important to understand what they do, because this is going to allow you to not only effectively equalize the reverb before it goes out, but this is what allows you to mimic and control the look and color of a room or a space, okay? Centrillium, that's right, Robzilla. Eddie, do you have a listing of those specs written out? Because I don't remember what you said. I'll put that in the description after the masterclass is done, okay? I'll stick it in the description both on Behance and on YouTube, so I'll put that data in there for you. Okay, all right, so that's just the sound of a spring. Now, chamber reverbs are something that I absolutely love. And when I did this recording, this is in my old house, I actually built a reverb chamber in there. So I live in Arizona, very common, we have very high ceilings here. So just as I explained to you, and in fact, I can just kind of show you what, if you go to an effect, so here, maybe, and these already have it printed, so we'll try it on something else, but I just want to show you real quickly. So Waves has, again, Abbey Road Chambers. And if you go into Abbey Road Chambers, this is just to kind of show you. I'll play this for you in a moment. But you can see that this is simulating, first of all, different chamber types. So this is a room. This is a tiled room, right? Then you have a mirrored room. Then you have a stone room. This is the loudspeaker. These are the microphones. And then you can change, one, the type of microphones, all right? The position, classic, which is what you see here, right? Versus facing the wall. So again, it's real close to the wall. Notice where the speaker is. So it's catching those reflections right as they hit off the wall. What do you think that's going to do to the sound? Greatly increase or change the equalization versus miking the room, which is typically from the center back about halfway, okay? So all of these characteristics greatly change it. And then you can even change the type of speaker and if it's facing the wall or facing the room. Remember, if the speaker is facing the wall, that means it's bouncing the sound off the wall, it's going the other way, and then the microphones are on the other side, picking it up as it hits the other wall. What? People really go to lengths like this just to make something reverberant? Well, they did, and I did this in my own house. And I have one here too. I don't keep it set up all the time. But so these are 1970 Ludwig drums, Pearl style. So this is a Ringo kit that I should have purchased and didn't because I was broke at the time. Recorded with printed chamber. So the reverb that you hear on here is actually from the environment. I've recorded it to tape. Take a quick listen here. Okay. Now, again, you might be thinking, oh, that sounds like kind of drums with some sort of echoey space. Yes. Okay, as opposed to sounding dry, they sound very alive. So when, again, they're in the context of this whole mix. Now, I don't know the state of this mix. We'll have to see what this sounds like here. 2, 3, 4.
Well, I always knew I was crazy for you. Now I know you thrill me so. If this is love, it's fabulous.
I got 2 vocals going on there, okay? Those drums really just, it's almost like I sat them on top of everything because that chamber, which is unique to those, the spring, which is unique to the guitars, makes everything stand out, okay? Biggest mistake you can make in a mix, if you're an audio noob, or even if you're kind of seasoned but not as familiar with DSP, signal processing, using the same reverb, specifically the same reverb type on everything. It's a mistake because you will invariably encounter at some point, unless you only ever have one person talking or one sound happening at a time, if you've got multiple things happening, it's just going to muddy everything up. So it's a really good idea to vary not only the amount of reverb, but the types of reverb that you're using based on what you're applying them to, all right? Now, case in point here, let's I'm gonna go back to Fear the Q-Tip for a second. By the way, just a quick, I am really curious, I'm asking this very seriously. If I made it, some of you have seen my Put Your Pants On t-shirt. So these are all titles of songs that I have out on Spotify and everything. You can find them. Fear the Q-Tip would be another one. Don't go around with pirate teeth would be another. I've got all these little things. Would anyone want to buy that stuff? I have this great designer, Christine Heron. She's one of our former creative residents who did a bunch of these, did the hand lettering for those. I'm thinking of making shirts. Would you wear a shirt that says Fear the Q-Tip on the front and the back says don't push it too far into your ear? Or Put Your Pants On and the back says because your daddy told you? Feel free to say no. All right, so let's solo the drum tracks here, and let's actually let you hear what the simulated chamber sounds like. Did you see that? My brain was like, what am I talking about? Chamber. Okay. Let me make sure we've got plenty of drumming going on here. Again, so I've got everything subgrouped together. It's already going through some compression and EQ here. So let's go, and we're going to go back to that Abbey Road chamber. All right, so I'll let you kind of hear just some cool things around the differences. And again, I'm doing all of this in this masterclass to just show you that there is ridiculous complexity in all of these things, which is why getting good mixes, look, it's easier than it used to be, but there's still an art to it, right? And that's why, you know, your friends or yourselves, if you're doing a lot of work, it's important to just know how these things work because then you know what to listen for. The common mistake is you're just like, oh, let's add reverb, and you don't touch any, like you just pick a preset. You're like, oh, that sounds good, but you don't know why, right? So this is helping you with the why. So let's go in here now. Look, I don't even know if we have any, I mean, there's so many presets in here. Let's start with something like drum loop vibe. So this is, again, an Abbey Road preset, all right? Now, typically for drums, we tend to go into stone rooms. This is very common these days. It gives a slightly brighter, very lively kind of sound. You're going to want to pay close attention to the wet-dry balance here, because again, this is on the a bust mix here. So 100% wet means no dry signal. So we're going to adjust that. But then we're going to start playing around with some of these other characteristics. Let's take a quick listen here. Ooh. Ooh, it's struggling to play that. All right, hold on. Let me see if I... Got so many effects in this. Let's see. Ooh, no, doesn't like that. It's really not liking this right now for some reason. It just worked fine. Let me see if I free up, try and lock some of these other things. Don't fail me now, Audition. Don't fail me now. I still have 9 minutes. Let's see. There we go. Just had to free up a little CPU. I'm using like 30 Waves VSTs on here, so. I love our native effects, don't get me wrong. They're all over, but the Waves ones, as Umakorn brilliantly pointed out, they sound amazing, and the UI is so pretty. How could you just not like using them? Also, Umakorn, how many instruments do I play? I play about 4 or 5 well. That sounds like a lot. Excuse me. I play about 4 or 5 well. I can play pretty much anything, except woodwinds. No talent with woodwinds. I can honk. I can make I can like make a note. I have no skill on woodwinds. Pretty much everything else I can get into and make something that sounds... I can fool most people. That comes out of studying at Berkeley. Okay, so let's take a listen. So this is the stone room. Lively, right? So here it is without. All right, now let's go into the classic chamber, and we're going to start messing around with this. So here is the original classic position, facing the wall. Let's hear what that sounds like. Remember I said Bonham? Immediately, so different from the stone sound, right? Wall is very boomy. Notice I changed the mic position to the room, and now we're getting all this kind of low end because the lower frequencies now have more time to travel to the microphones. When the microphone is like this, and it's against the wall, here's more nerd info for you. Is this going to pick up low end boominess on a tiled wall? No, because low frequencies are very long waves. They're very long waveforms. They're just bypassing those mics altogether. They're hitting somewhere over here. It never even gets to the mic. But when I choose the room, now that reflection, you can see it's hitting the wall over here, it's bouncing up over here, and it's ending up over there, right? So let's change that. Let's go facing the room instead now. Super boomy. So the classic position is the nicest. We can go to an Altec speaker. Those are typically a little brighter. A little more mid-rangey. Okay. So again, placing it in environments, changing the sound of the environment. Chambers, all right? These are hard to master. I love this effect. It has amazing amounts of detail, and you see top cut, bass cut. So this is, again, the same as high frequency roll off, low frequency. That's what this is. Very easy to make something sound bad going through here, right? And all the presets in the world aren't going to help you. You got to tweak them based on what it is that you're playing with. All right. Brandon McCune. I know this is a silly question, but can these methods be used for film audio design, or are they just for music? No, they're absolutely for film design. Thank you for that. That's a perfect segue. It all applies. So let me go into that now. All right, I know it's focusing a lot on music. Here we go. Okay. So this is the pre-mix that we did a couple of weeks ago. And this has got dialogue and music mixed in. So this is not, again, something I would typically do. This is not like a best practice for workflow. I wouldn't add reverb at the end to the mix necessarily, but you can. And for something that has the dialogue and the music mixed together, this is very dry right now. So take a quick listen to it as it is.
But Dwayne, I don't even have any of the money. Amy she split and took it all.
Well, I talked to Amy. She came to see me.
Okay. So it's fine, but it's a little too dry. It sounds a little too sterile. And if I'm in a theater, it's almost going to sound overdubbed. It's not going to sound quite so natural. So this is another good example of using room reverb, okay? Now, fortunately, to save time, I already created a preset for you. Notice here, room size, 1, very short decay, very small early reflections, wide. We're letting in a lot of that high in there because I don't want to dampen things all that much. I want it to respect the size and the feel. They're like in a kitchen, so it's going to be a little brighter, right? Cutting everything below 250. All right, let's take a listen here, and I'll start to bring up that wet signal.
But Dwayne, I don't even have any of the money. Amy she split and took it all.
So it's just the room.
Well, I talked to Amy. She came to see me. You see, she's what they call professional. And you're what they call can't win for losing.
So it's in.
She tell you she took it all? She took the whole damn score?
What she did is she paid me what she owed me for her half.
No sound.
And now you're gonna pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
Oh, you got it, Liv. You got it. You just lost it.
Now again, this is the perfect example in film where if you're trying to recreate the space, if they're capturing these using, a really good boom, which they most likely are, supercardioid pattern, shotgun mic like my MKH 416 that we talked about before, it's going to capture a little bit of the room ambience, but you're going to want to put that back in, right? It's going to sound a little too direct. And again, if they move a little, those off-axis sounds are going to be really noticeable if you're watching on screen. Forget theater, you're watching at home. Adding back a little of that ambient space with a room reverb is going to make all the difference, okay? That answer your question there? And there are no silly questions, that is correct. Yes, Brandon, so excellent question. For sound design, what Waves plugins do I recommend to try? Well, you saw a couple of them there. There's the Abbey Road plates, Abbey Road chambers. For additional reverbs, there's another one that I really like called, is it called H Reverb? I think that's actually what it is. Now this one has a very 90s-ish, early 2000s kind of UI. Kind of looks like 80s era reverb units. This one has some weird sounds and weird characteristics, but it sounds very, very good. All right, and it's nice. Having said that, let's go back into another little film workflow here. Okay. All right. And specifically something I've shown here before. So this is just going to kind of illustrate how to use reverb for like creating, again, a big ambient space where we're simulating the sound of a door closing. All right. And this is going to show off some of those parameters. So take a look. Let's see if I've got everything on right here. I believe I do. Okay. Yeah. Let's take a look at this. So let's focus on the sound of that clangy door. All right, so it's things coming together. I'm kind of using 4 different sound effects here to simulate that, all with this kind of metallic kind of sound. Now there's 2 specific tracks where I'm actually reverberating them using the convolution reverb. So let's start with this one here and take a listen. So this is actually, it's metal pounding. Now that sounds pretty good by itself. Let's go ahead and turn on the convolution reverb, and in this case I'm also using a hall. Let's wind it back and go ahead and play it. All right, before and after. Right? Now I'm damping a lot of the high and the low frequency, but this is a metal plate So it's already super bright, right? I've got a fairly reasonably sized room. It's very, very wide. I'm adding some gain, and it's just kind of expanding that and making it a little bit bigger and a little bit boomier. Now, where you're going to hear some really neat differences is in this one here. So this one is also using convolution. All right, let's open this one up and take a listen. Now, this is a car door. Here it is dry. Now, let's listen to it with the reverb on. Now, it just kind of has a psh. What if we want to now actually accentuate some of that? Well, we're damping a lot of that low frequency. Let's take it all the way down and hear what that sounds like. Ooh. Gives it a nice low tail. And now in context. All right, my friends. So there's so much more that we could talk about, but unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you so much for joining. We've got the Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge coming up next. If you've got questions for me, you can hit me up on Twitter or YouTube. Until next time, have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.